Hey everyone, this is Libertarian Black Man. I'm talking about Arizona's new licensing law that the state just passed earlier in the year. And I support it. As a libertarian, I believe we have far too much licensing regulation in America, and we need to reduce and hopefully eliminate all of these licensing laws. But this is a step in the right direction, although there are some strings attached which I'm going to talk about. So the Institute for Justice, which studies licensing laws in all of the states along with other types of regulations on economic activity, put out this headline that Arizona became the first state to broadly recognize out-of-state licenses. In particular, occupational licenses, meaning licenses to do carpentry or plumbing or auto repair or medical or other types of labor, which are recognized in states outside of Arizona, are going to be recognized as valid in the state of Arizona. Specifically, if you have a license to do something as an occupation in another state, you will be licensed in Arizona because you were already licensed in another state. And of course, the idea behind this is very well explained by the managing attorney of the Institute for Justice in Arizona, Paul Avila, who said, quote, "Workers don't lose their job skills by moving across state lines, but licensing laws often treat them as they do." And that HB 2569, which is the licensing law in Arizona that was just passed, is a common sense reform that will help expand economic opportunity by making it easier for people to move to Arizona to further their careers. I agree 100%. If you've been working in an occupation for many years, licensed and everything, moving to another state does not change your level of skill. In fact, if you live on the state border, moving to another state could be moving a mile down the street. And it makes no sense to believe that you should have to be relicensed all over again because somehow your skills that worked in the other state don't translate into skills in the new state you move to, even if it's the same occupation in the same industry that you are working in. It is a step in the right direction, but like I said, there are strings attached. So for example, you still need to apply for an Arizona license. You can't take a license, say, from Minnesota and come to Arizona, and that license will serve as allowing you to work. You have to apply for an Arizona license, but the process is streamlined for you to get one because you were already licensed in another state. There's a second drawback, and this one is even worse than the first. And that is that the law in Arizona, which recognizes out-of-state licenses, does not abolish existing licensing regulation in the state, meaning that if Arizona requires you to have a license for a certain occupation, and they certainly do, you must still obtain one even if you did not need one in the state that you came from. So the Institute for Justice points out that the case of a entrepreneur named Essence Farmer worked as a natural hair braider in Maryland and is from Arizona but moved to Maryland and did not need a license in the state of Maryland to braid hair. But then they came back to Arizona, and in Arizona you do need a license, in particular 1,600 hours of training. Essence then went to the Institute for Justice, had them sue the state of Arizona to get the state to change the law so that they could practice hair braiding in the state of Arizona. Again, they came from a state that did not require licensing, but then moved to Arizona, which did require licensing. This new law that Arizona just passed does not abolish licensing regulations for occupations that are required to be licensed in Arizona that may not be required in other states. So that is a big downside to this law. Still a step in the right direction for recognizing state licenses elsewhere, but this is a big problem. in particular because Arizona is one of the worst states for licensing. It has 68 of 102 lower income occupations that are required to be licensed. It ranks in the top 5 in the most burdensome licensing laws in the country. It is number 4. It is also number 4 in the most broadly and onerously licensed states. So if you look at all 50 states, Arizona is in the top 5 worst states for licensing, ranking at number 4 when it comes to licensing that creates the greatest burden on economic growth in the country. Specifically, occupational licenses in Arizona require an average of $612 in fees, 765 days, which is more than 2 years of education and experience, and approximately 2 exams. This hurts economic growth. Anytime you require someone to pay money and spend time, that is productivity that comes out of the economy, and it is reflected in the amount of lost wealth and opportunity and economic prosperity in the state. So Arizona imposes particularly burdensome fees and experience requirements on would-be licenses in several occupations. And these fees are 3 times the national average. So in one case, you look at bill collection agencies that face Arizona's heftiest fees, forcing them to pay about $1,500 compared to the national average of $551 in other licensed states. And then you have water well drillers paying over $1,000 compared to $350 for the national average. You've got other obstetricians who are spending over 1,000 days, 3 years of experience before they can enter into that industry. And of course, the national average is lower than that. So in other states, you're spending 700 days where it's over 1,000 in Arizona. So this is one of the worst states for licensing, which prompted the law to be changed in Arizona because it is hurting economic growth there. And in fact, Arizona, when it comes to percentage of workers licensed, it is in the middle in terms of the percentage, 24th out of 50 states, highest percentage, 24th highest percentage in the state. But here is where you see the real cost. Estimated jobs lost per year, 29,000. Estimated dead weight losses in millions of dollars, $85 million in economic value lost per year due to the economic cost of licensing in the state. Misallocated resources, estimated in millions of dollars, 2,831. So we're talking about almost $3 billion in misallocated resources as a result of licensing regulations that impose costs and time upon people who aspire to get into an industry. And then you have the estimated economic returns from licensing, 12%, which is basically, this does not make up for the value lost in terms of licensing, costs, fees, time, effort, and money that is involved before you can break into an industry. So Arizona has made the right decision to try to recognize out-of-state licenses. But why is it doing this? It's because it was one of the worst states in the nation, and by the way, it still is. A better approach to licensing would be to allow the marketplace, meaning private organizations, that's businesses and nonprofits, to decide whether or not a license is required prior to entry into an industry, meaning that companies can require licenses on their own without the government telling them that they have to, for employees to compete against those who do not have that requirement. So in other words, a business that requires a license may drop the requirement if mandatory licensing makes it too difficult to find highly demanded workers. Because remember, licensing kind of weeds out a lot of people by saying you've got to pay money and you've got to spend time and effort studying and learning a skill or learning a job before you can even get a job in this industry. It weeds people out, and in fact, you might have an industry that is growing so fast or a business growing very fast that you need workers pronto. and you might not be able to find enough of them because you've imposed licensing before someone can get hired. So you may decide we're going to get rid of those licensing requirements and just hire anyone who is willing to learn and do the job right. On the other hand, firms that do not require licenses may require them if the quality of the work of unlicensed labor is severely lacking. So you decide you're going to hire anyone and see if you can train them well enough and fast enough, but they do not perform well enough for you to make money as a business. So you as a business may decide to introduce licensing requirements to get better workers. You also may decide as a business to cancel licensing regulations if in fact the regulations make it too difficult for you to find workers when you really need a lot of them quickly. But this is what happens in the marketplace. It's a trial and error experiment. Businesses and nonprofit organizations that are private should be allowed to decide whether or not they're going to require licenses. When the government comes in and they impose the requirement of licensing, then all they do is protect businesses that have high costs by imposing costs on lower businesses through licensing. So the marketplace really should be controlling whether or not someone is licensed, and if in fact a license does provide value, then businesses will adopt it, and if it does not provide value or sufficient value, businesses will have nothing to do with it, because at the end of the day, the marketplace is about creating value, not about imposing a certain way of doing economic activity. So the government often comes in with political agendas which are about protecting one business against another through licensing, through certification requirements, and the marketplace is simply about the economic agenda of profit and market performance. So licensing should be 100% left to the marketplace, and then we'll see who decides to license and who does not. Thanks for watching. Please join the Libertarian Black Man YouTube channel, subscribe, and become a follower of our page, Libertarian Black Man, and we hope to see you in the next video.